Heavenly Stories.
In the vast, sun-drenched fields of the ancient world, two brothers labored under the same sky, yet their hearts were worlds apart. Cain, the elder, was a man of the soil, hands calloused from turning the earth, planting seeds, and tending to the fragile crops that fed his family. Abel, younger and more carefree, tended flocks of sheep, moving gracefully across the pastures, his life a rhythm of guiding, feeding, and watching over his animals. To the outside life seemed simple, even harmonious. But inside Cain's heart, a storm was brewing. He watched Abel with a sense of unease, a quiet jealousy that clung to his thoughts. Abel's offerings to God, always accepted and honored, seemed to shine brighter than Cain's. Each time Abel laid down a portion of his flock, fresh and perfect, with a humility that touched even the divine, Cain's heart grew heavier, weighed down by feelings he barely understood, feelings he could not voice. Their father, Adam, and mother, Eve, had warned them that choices bore consequences, that life demanded responsibility and self-reflection. Yet Cain's mind spiraled into a dark tunnel where envy whispered louder than reason. He began to question the fairness of the world, the favoritism he imagined God showed toward Abel. Each glance at his brother, each smile Abel shared with God, fanned the flames of a jealousy that had taken root deep within him. Night after night, Cain wrestled with his feelings. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by visions of being overlooked, of having his efforts go unnoticed. Abel, ever gentle and unassuming, remained unaware of the storm brewing in Cain's soul. And so the brothers moved through their days side by side, yet apart, separated by a gulf of emotion neither dared to cross or confront. God, ever watchful, noticed the tension simmering beneath Cain's surface. He spoke softly to Cain one day, a warning laced with hope and accountability. Why do you feel anger rise in your heart? If you do what is right, you too will be accepted. But if you do not, sin crouches at your door. It desires to claim you, but you must master it. Cain heard the words, yet they did little to soothe his burning envy. The seeds of resentment had taken root too deeply. And as the sun set over the fields, painting the world in gold and crimson, a fateful choice lingered in the air, invisible yet potent, a choice that would echo through generations. The morning sun rose slowly, casting long shadows across the fields. Cain's hands were already dusty from tilling the land, the scent of rich soil filling his nostrils. Yet no matter how deeply he buried his hands in the earth, he could not bury the bitterness gnawing at his heart. Across the hills, Abel led his flock to fresh pastures, the sheep bleating softly, their coats gleaming in the early light. It was time to offer their gifts to God. Abel, as always, brought the firstborn of his flock, tender and flawless, an offering given with humility and love. Cain brought produce from his harvest, the fruits of his labor, hoping this time it might be enough. But when God looked upon their gifts, Abel's offering was accepted, while Cain's was not. The rejection stung Cain deeply, not merely because of pride, but because he felt unseen, unappreciated, overlooked by the one who had the power to bless or withhold favor. A dark cloud settled over his soul, and envy, like a creeping vine, began to tighten around his heart. He tried to suppress the feelings, tried to remind himself of God's words, "If you do what is right, you too will be accepted." But the warmth of Abel's favor burned too brightly in his vision, mocking him silently. Abel approached him later that day, unaware of the storm inside his brother. "Cain, why do you look so troubled?" Abel asked softly, concern in his voice. But Cain could not answer. Words seemed useless, meaningless in the face of the envy that had already rooted itself. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, as the two brothers returned to their labors, separated by more than fields and flocks. They were separated by an unspoken tension, a growing darkness that neither could ignore. In the solitude of the evening, Cain wandered, hands brushing against the rough bark of trees, eyes fixed on the horizon. He thought of the rejection, of Abel's favored place, and his thoughts twisted into dangerous fantasies. What if he could change the outcome? What if the scales of attention, of favor, could somehow tip in his direction? Sin whispered in the shadows, patient and relentless, telling him that action, drastic, irreversible action, might bring relief, might bring recognition. But even as the voice of jealousy grew louder, another part of Cain, a quieter, softer part, remembered the words of God. Sin desires to claim you, but you must master it. It was a warning, a lifeline tossed into the turbulent waters of his mind. Cain's chest tightened as he grappled with the choice before him, knowing that one wrong step could shatter everything. The night stretched on, and sleep eluded him, his heart caught between obedience and desire, between the calm of reason and the pull of a darker path. Little did Cain know that the next day, under the same blazing sun and vast sky, his choice would forever alter the course of history. A single act, born of envy and unchecked anger, would become the first story of human tragedy, a story that would echo through generations, a warning of the power of jealousy and the weight of responsibility. Dawn broke, painting the land with a pale golden light. Cain's heart pounded as he walked through the fields, each step heavy with unresolved anger. The envy that had been simmering for days now burned openly, demanding attention, whispering that he deserved what Abel had been given. He watched Abel in the distance, tending his sheep with a calm ease, unaware of the turmoil brewing in his brother's soul. Cain tried to reason with himself, to find a way to quiet the storm inside. "It's just the favor of God," he muttered, gripping a handful of soil. "Maybe I can do better tomorrow, maybe," but the words fell hollow, unable to soothe the gnawing resentment. Each glance at Abel, each gentle word the younger brother offered in prayer, fueled the fire. The dark seed that had been planted in Cain's heart had grown into a twisted vine, winding tighter around his thoughts. God's warning echoed once more in Cain's mind, "If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not, sin is crouching at the door, it desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Cain's chest tightened. He knew the choice before him was dangerous, yet the envy had become a voice too loud to ignore. It spoke of fairness, of recognition, of a world where he would finally be seen. And somewhere deep down, Cain knew that the voice of jealousy demanded more than words, it demanded action. Abel approached, unaware of the storm. "Cain, let's work together today. The fields are vast, but we can finish them if we help one another." His voice carried a warmth that Cain could no longer feel. The offer, meant in kindness, only served to ignite the anger simmering beneath the surface. Cain's hands trembled, not from fatigue, but from the surge of emotion he could not contain. The two brothers walked side by side, yet the distance between them was immeasurable. Each step Cain took felt heavier, weighed down by the dark thoughts pressing against him. He thought of the offerings, the rejection, the subtle ease with which Abel seemed to move through life. The resentment had become a shadow he could not escape, a relentless presence whispering that something had to change, something permanent. As the sun climbed higher, Cain's mind raced. He imagined Abel's life ending, a world where his brother's favor no longer cast a shadow over him. The thought was abhorrent, yet intoxicating, a dangerous allure that made his pulse quicken. And as he looked at Abel, singing softly to his sheep, laughing at some small joy in the day, Cain realized that the choice he had been avoiding for so long now stood before him, undeniable and terrifying. For the first time, Cain felt the true weight of his freedom, the terrifying knowledge that he could act, and that the consequences, once unleashed, would be irreversible. The storm inside him swirled faster, mixing guilt and desire, fear and longing. By the time the brothers reached the field's edge, Cain's resolve had formed. The shadow in his heart had grown too strong to deny. The die was about to be cast, and nothing would ever be the same. The day wore on, sunlight glaring down on the brothers, shadows stretching long and distorted across the earth. Cain led Abel further from the fields, beyond the familiar places where they had grown up together. Abel, trusting and unaware, followed with a gentle curiosity, humming softly as he guided his flock. Cain's heart pounded with a dark rhythm, each beat echoing the thoughts he had tried to suppress. They stopped in a quiet, secluded place, a spot where the wind whispered through the trees and the earth felt untouched. Abel turned to Cain with a smile, expecting camaraderie, perhaps a shared laugh, a gentle conversation. "It's a good day, Cain," Abel said. "The fields are ready, and the sheep are healthy. Thank God for his blessings." Cain looked into his brother's eyes, and in that moment, he saw everything he had envied, the favor, the innocence, the joy that seemed to come so effortlessly. The dark thoughts that had been festering in his heart surged forward, overwhelming reason, empathy, and even fear. Sin crouched at the door, just as God had warned, and Cain's hands, those hands that had worked the soil faithfully, now trembled with a force that was no longer his own. I can't," Cain muttered under his breath, though the words felt empty even to him. Abel's face, calm and open, met Cain's, unaware of the storm that had consumed his brother. Cain's envy, once a quiet murmur, had become a roar that drowned out everything else. And in that terrible instant, he made a choice that would echo through time. Cain struck. The blow, sudden and brutal, shattered the bond that had once been brotherly. Abel fell to the earth, the warmth of life slipping away as the light in his eyes dimmed. Cain stood over him, chest heaving, eyes wide with shock and horror at what he had done. The quiet place, once serene, now seemed suffocating, the trees and wind witnesses to an act that would stain the world forever. A heavy silence followed. Cain's hands, slick with the evidence of his envy and rage, trembled uncontrollably. The reality of what he had done sank in like a stone in deep water. Abel, his brother, was gone, and with him vanished the innocence and simplicity of their shared life. Cain had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, a choice that bore consequences beyond his comprehension. And then came the voice of God, cutting through the horror like lightning through storm clouds. "Cain, where is your brother Abel?" "I do not know," Cain replied, his voice tight, almost unrecognizable even to himself. "Am I my brother's keeper?" God's gaze pierced him, seeing the truth Cain could not escape. "What have you done?" "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are cursed, driven from the land that opened its mouth to receive him. You will be a wanderer, shunned, a man marked by the consequences of your choice." Cain fell to his knees, the enormity of his actions pressing down with a weight he could not bear. The envy that had driven him now became a cage, trapping him in guilt, fear, and despair. The world had shifted irrevocably, and Cain realized that from this moment forward, nothing would be as it had been. The first murder had been committed. And with it came a lesson carved into the very foundation of humanity, a lesson about jealousy, choice, and the heavy price of turning away from righteousness. After the tragic act, Cain wandered the land like a shadow of himself, the sun scorching him by day and the cold biting him by night. Every step he took reminded him of what he had done, the life he had stolen, the brother he had destroyed. Fields once familiar now seemed foreign, and every sound of movement, every rustle in the grass, reminded him of Abel's absence. The land, which had once nourished him, now felt like a judge, whispering the weight of guilt with every gust of wind. Cain tried to speak with others, but no words could ease the turmoil inside. The curse God had placed on him followed him relentlessly. He would be a wanderer, never at peace, marked by his sin. Travelers and townsfolk gave him wary looks, sensing the shadow that clung to him like a second skin. Even the earth, once pliant and forgiving, seemed to resist his touch. Seeds he planted failed to sprout as they once had, reminding him that the consequences of his actions extended far beyond himself. Nights were the hardest. Alone under the stars, Cain's thoughts returned again and again to Abel. He remembered his brother's laughter, his trust, the light in his eyes, and the simple joy of working the land together. Regret gnawed at him, relentless and unforgiving. The knowledge that he could never undo what he had done was a constant, painful companion. Yet, even in his despair, Cain began to understand the depth of God's warning. Sin crouches at the door, and yet, for all the darkness Cain had embraced, God had marked him, not to abandon him entirely, but to ensure that his life, though cursed, would still carry the chance of reflection, of learning. The mark God set upon him was both protection and a reminder. Even the gravest sin demanded accountability, and mercy, however small, still existed. As Cain wandered, he encountered others who had been shaped by their choices, some living in regret, some seeking redemption. These encounters forced him to confront his own nature, the jealousy that had led to such destruction. With each step, he realized that the path of life was defined not just by the choices one made, but by the courage to face their consequences, however heavy. Though he could never bring Abel back, Cain began, slowly, to understand the lessons his actions had carved into history. Envy, unchecked, leads to ruin. Choices, once made, leave marks that cannot be erased. And even when the darkness of one's deed seems overwhelming, reflection, responsibility, and understanding can be the first steps toward a kind of redemption. Cain's story spread among generations, a cautionary tale. Fathers told sons, and mothers whispered to daughters about the dangers of jealousy, the weight of unchecked anger, and the importance of mastery over one's impulses. Abel's life, though cut short, continued to speak through the silence left behind, teaching the living about innocence, trust, and the price of virtue. Even as a wanderer marked by his sin, Cain's journey carried a message: every choice matters, every emotion matters, and the heart must be guarded against the subtle, persistent shadows that seek to claim it. The world was forever changed by a single act of envy, and yet, in the midst of punishment, there remained a glimmer of understanding, a chance, however slim, that the living could learn from the mistakes of those who came before. Years passed, and the story of Cain and Abel became more than a tale of two brothers, it became a lesson for all of humanity. Cain, wandering endlessly across lands that never fully welcomed him, carried with him the weight of choices and consequences. The mark on his forehead, the reminder of God's warning and protection, set him apart from others, a living symbol of both punishment and mercy. Everywhere he went, the shadow of his past followed, unrelenting and patient, forcing him to reflect on every action, every thought that had led him to that fateful day. Yet in his wandering, Cain began to see glimpses of something he had long ignored: understanding, even compassion. He watched families, friends, and communities struggle with jealousy, pride, and anger, and he recognized the same seeds that had once taken root in his heart. And he realized that his suffering could serve a purpose. His story could teach others to guard their hearts, to master the impulses that lead to ruin, and to value love and humility over envy. Abel's legacy, too, endured. Though his life had been brief, his faithfulness, kindness, and trust in God left an imprint on the world. Shepherds told their children of the gentle brother whose offerings were accepted, whose innocence had made him beloved, and whose untimely death reminded all that envy and anger can have devastating consequences. Abel's life, in its simplicity and purity, became a symbol of virtue, a standard against which the living measured their own actions. As Cain continued to wander, he often reflected on the moment that had changed everything, the instant when envy overcame reason, when anger silenced conscience, when a choice severed a bond that could never be mended. He remembered God's words, and though they had once felt like a warning, they now felt like a guide: sin crouches at the door, it desires to claim you, but you must rule over it. Cain understood now that life demanded vigilance, that emotions could be dangerous if left unchecked, and that every person carries the responsibility to make choices wisely. In the end, Cain's life was a mixture of sorrow, reflection, and, perhaps, understanding. He could never undo the past, but he could live with awareness, teaching through example, and warning others of the darkness that envy and unchecked desire bring. The first murder in human history was more than a tragedy, it was a mirror, reflecting the eternal struggle between human weakness and the pursuit of righteousness, between the temptation to destroy and the challenge to create, forgive, and learn. Generations later, the story of Cain and Abel echoed through time, reminding humanity of the fragile balance within the human heart. The tale was simple yet profound: jealousy, if not mastered, can lead to unimaginable consequences. Love and humility, if nurtured, leave a legacy far beyond the span of a single life. And though the mark of Cain remained, a symbol of sin and protection, the lessons of his choices were clear: every action matters, every moment carries weight, and the heart must be tended as carefully as the land, the flock, or the lives of those we love. In the silence of the fields, in the quiet moments of reflection, and in the stories told by elders to their children, the lives of Cain and Abel continue to teach. A story of envy, loss, responsibility, and, ultimately, the enduring hope that wisdom can grow from even the darkest moments. Humanity remembered, reflected, and hoped, for in understanding the past, the living might choose differently, and in choosing differently, perhaps find a way to live in peace, harmony, and grace.